Well, welcome everybody. It's so lovely to see so many people here this evening for Professor Boy's talk for us this evening. I'm deeply honoured to introduce her. Mary Boyes is the Skinner and McAlpin Professor of Practical Theology at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, as well as its former academic vice president and dean. Having previously served as a professor at Boston College, she's the author of 6 books, including Redeeming Our Sacred Story, The Death of Jesus, and Relations Between Jews and Christians. She is also editor or co-editor of 4 other books, as well as numerous articles and reviews. She is the recipient of honorary doctorates from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, the Catholic Theological Union, the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, and Gratz College. She has been a vowed member since 1968 of the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary, a congregation of Roman Catholic women. She received her master's and doctoral degrees from Columbia University on a joint program with Union Theological Seminary, and she's done advanced study at the Ecumenical Institute for Theological Research in Jerusalem, and is, as we've said, had numerous honorary degrees awarded to her. I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Professor Boyes so that we can hear from her what she has to tell us this evening. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Rabbi Kahn-Harris, and thanks to the Oxford Interfaith Forum for inviting me to participate in this exploration of sacred literature in interfaith contexts. I hope that you can understand my US inflected dialect or accent. I confess that when I watch the BBC or other British productions, I often have to put on the closed captions. So I will try not to speak as fast as most New Yorkers do. I am not by birth a New Yorker, so perhaps I can slow down a little bit to reflect my origins in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. So I have prepared a very brief PowerPoint. There are only 8 slides. There's nothing particularly visually beautiful about them, but a PowerPoint does 2 things for me. One, it keeps me on track so that the logic of a presentation is clearer. And secondly, in this medium where one sits alone in a room staring at one's computer, and there's something so sort of weird about this whole experience of, my background is in the classroom and the give and the take, and I just feel like I'm so boring when I'm on the computer. I feel like it's some shadow of my former self. At any rate, so one of the nice things about Zoom is that I can at least see faces, and when I put on the PowerPoint slides, I'm not staring just at my own face so much. So that's its dual purpose. But the more important thing is so that, and particularly when we have various language traditions and so forth, seeing a written text, I think, can be helpful. So that being said, I'm going to put up the PowerPoint. I hope you can all see it. So I see some heads nodding. So just to reiterate my pleasure at having an opportunity to do this, I'm working on a project tentatively called Turning the Christian Imagination. And my hope is to distill some of the scholarship about the Bible in a language that is more accessible to people than often is the case when scholars venture into the public forum. So let me begin by connecting my presentation with what I understand is the purpose of this reading group in sacred literature in interfaith contexts. So I saw that there are two main purposes or goals of this: to explore the rich tapestry of sacred literature, and also then to reflect on the role of sacred literature as a source of inspiration and revelation in various interfaith contexts. And I began to have misgivings about what I was working on, because in a way today, I'm not so much talking about a rich tapestry of the Christian sacred literature as a problematic one, as a troubling one. And so in these notes, as I was drawing them up, it seemed to me important to acknowledge from the outset, at least, that in my understanding of the Christian tradition, inspiration and revelation, which are two huge terms, that they're not inherent in the texts themselves, as if there's something sort of magic about sacred literature, but they are manifest in the ways that believing communities read the text, interpret the text, and draw on them in their lives. That is, what do the texts enable people to do or not to, or in a sense, instruct them not to do. So at least in my own Catholic tradition, there's sort of a formulaic of the word of God in human language. That is, because sacred literature, at least in the Christian tradition, as we look at it, it's of human composition, it's perspectival, therefore, and it's limited. It reflects the biases of the writers as well as their great insights. It bears the scars of human fragility, even as it bears witness to the, what I would call, the elusive divine presence in the world. So today I'd like to focus on the ways that biblical scholars offer alternative and, I find, convincing interpretation of problematic New Testament texts that are traditionally understood as depicting Jews and Judaism in negative ways. In one extent, one way of looking at this is sort of looking at the way that the text, what the texts seem to say, if you take them more or less at face value. So, and in order to show the significance then of my focus, I first need to be explicit about what these troubling texts are, texts that have and may continue to lead to tragic consequences for Jews. So that one of the most important things to bear in mind here is, what are the consequences of our readings? What do interpretations lead people to do or inspire them, or how does it sustain them in ways that allow them to be countercultural? So that's sort of my connection to what I think that the Oxford Interfaith Forum is about. Now, I changed a little bit from the abstract that I sent. So this now has 4 sections. I first want to say something about the New Testament's depiction of Jews and Judaism, and I would like to use as a case in point we'll just say in general, because I'll get there soon, about the notorious, or the so-called notorious Pharisees. And then juxtaposed to that is what I'm calling in part 2, and you notice I have them in quotation marks, the scholars' Pharisees. And I generalize because, of course, scholars are by nature contentious and we don't all agree, and there's no such thing as a total consensus about the Pharisees for some very good reasons. Nevertheless, they are an important counterpoint to the view of the Pharisees taken at face value. And then in part 3, I'd like to peer beyond or behind and beyond what the scholars' methods are doing. Again, not using particularly, trying to avoid actually technical language, while using what I think are the great insights that language leads to. And then finally, some implications for Christians, for the church today, in relationship of the topic, in relationship to the topic today. So in a presentation of this kind, I find that it's important to do a few things, but to go slowly enough. So those of you who are on here, I recognize some names of very well-known scholars. My principal audience is not the scholars themselves, although since we have people on this in this forum today who are authors of works on the Pharisees, I certainly welcome their perspectives, and I probably read them along the way. And then in part 4, in terms of implications for the life of the church, again, something somewhat personal as well as professional. So let's talk about the Pharisees. So and again, these are generalizations because this could easily be hours and hours of presentation, but in general, I would say that the negative depictions of Jews in the New Testament are fairly numerous. And now how exactly you would count them, I mean, some of the texts are a little more difficult to decipher. But it's a paradox, it seems to me. It's these negative depictions are all over the New Testament. They're not only in the Gospels. They are in the Acts of the Apostles. Of course, it depends also in terms of Paul's letters, how you understand Paul. But they're not really taken note of by most Christians. Christians who go to church and go to traditions where the scriptures are proclaimed, are read, I hear things and I sort of look around and nobody else really seems bothered by them. One of my curiosities is why, given so much scholarship in both scholarly circles, but also popular circles about the Pharisees, why so little seems to have made an impact. I have some hypotheses, but we can talk about that later. Now, in general, it seems to me there are 3 major types of negative depictions about the Jews in the New Testament. The first set of references attributes responsibility for the death of Jesus to Jews or to some subset of Jews. Among the more famous texts are in the Gospel of Matthew, 27:25, his blood be upon you and upon your children, and John 19:5-7, which is this exchange between Pontius Pilate and this crowd of Jews in Jerusalem who want to crucify him. And both of those texts in many Christian traditions are proclaimed as part of the Passion narratives in Holy Week. So it's one thing to be reading the Bible oneself, but this is now proclaimed in a rather solemn liturgical setting. The second set of negative depictions of Jews occurs by associating negative characteristics with either particular Jews or with groups. So interestingly, of the so-called 12, also known as the apostles, Judas is the traitor, the one who betrays Jesus, who hands Jesus over. He has the most explicitly, if you will, a Jewish name. Although, of course, all of the disciples and Jesus are Jews. but somehow, Judas has been so demonized, and actually, as the texts go on, he gets progressively more demonized in the Gospels. And then there are the notorious Pharisees that we'll get to in a minute. And then finally, associating demonic language about Jews. You are children of the devil in John 8:44. And then in the book of Revelation, which many Christians don't really pay too much attention to, unless, but in fundamentalist circles do, in which you have 2 references to the synagogue of Satan. So, of course, the key here is, what did these phrases and assignment of characteristics and of responsibility for the crucifixion, what did they mean in their originating contexts? And what do we do with them now? And how do we read them? And precisely because they are texts that play an important role liturgically, it seems to me all the more important that we are attentive to their place in the Christian life. Now, to move on to the Pharisees. So I'm just going to talk about the Pharisees as a case in point today. Why am I choosing them? Well, for one thing, most people, even those who know nothing about the Bible or very little about the Bible, have heard of the Pharisees, and they usually know that they're problems. So the way I look at it is that among the dramatis personae of the New Testament, the Pharisees really stand out because they assume the role of Jesus's principal antagonists. In the Gospels, particularly in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 23, they're depicted as a brood of vipers, as blind guides, blind fools, and most memorably, of course, as hypocrites. So overall, they are presented as nefarious characters. So it's not surprising that most Christian writers over the ages have rendered them as archetypes of malevolence. The most familiar portrayal of Pharisees describes them really as polar opposites of the sort of religious commitment that Jesus is preaching, because they're captive to legalism, and they're hypocrites because they don't practice what they teach. They misuse their authority because they impose heavy burdens on people without taking up those burdens themselves. They lack humility because they crave acknowledgement of their piety, asceticism, and charitable life. They are self-important, seeking places of honor and titles of respect. This, of course, has nothing to do with academe. They are obsessed with meticulous details of religious practice. They flout the deeper meaning of religious commitment. The Pharisees, in short, are everything that a Christian disciple should not be. In fact, you could say, I think the Pharisees, as they're depicted overall in the New Testament, are everything that a good person should not be. Now, why do we remember them so much? Well, first of all, because the references are frequent. Secondly, they're memorable. I mean, the kind of vivid language that's used. They strike a chord. We all know people who have share some of the characteristics of the Pharisees. In other words, I think they preach. I mean, and as a teacher, I'm always looking for counterexamples. I mean, sometimes when people kind of look vaguely trying to understand, you say, well, think of it this way, and then you kind of do the opposite. So they play, from a literary standpoint, an important role because they're the polar opposite of what Jesus is teaching, or how to respond to the teaching of Jesus. So I could say a lot more about the negative, but today I want to stress the role of scholarship. And let me acknowledge from the beginning here that I'm not trying to suggest that the scholars are this elite group who know exactly who the Pharisees are and are sort of condescendingly looking down at clergy who preach or teachers and so forth, and saying, "Oh, you must come along with us." In fact, there's not a huge division, at least in my own church tradition, between the scholars and those who are crafting some of the documents that come out of some of the official channels of the church that are developing what Nostra Aetate from the Second Vatican Council proclaimed in 1968, and trying to nuance and refine the expressions of that. So I'm not in any way trying to. So here I'm just trying to suggest that this is what I'd like to present is trying to distill what scholars today are saying to us about the Pharisees, that I think gives us a new way of understanding the preaching of Jesus and in relationship to Jews and Judaism. So let me start here with saying a little bit about New Testament authors. So at the time of the writing of the New Testament, which principally happens after the year 70 of the first century of the Common Era, exactly when the last New Testament book is written is somewhat debatable, but it may be early into the second century. There was as yet no Christianity as such. So when we think of the Gospels, for instance, most people think of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as Christians, but there was no real Christianity. So to what extent we can say that the New Testament authors are Jewish? Well, most likely, or maybe they were the so-called God-fearers. They don't give us any bios. So, but it's, and some of the Gospels are more Jewishly inflected, if you will, than others, principally Matthew in some ways, but all of them come out of the world of Jewish Hellenistic literature. The second thing that's so important is that the word Torah is I think generally misunderstood in Christian life. It's a much more capacious term than we've thought it to be, and to simply translate it as the New Testament generally is translated, as law from the movement from Torah to Nomos, when we went from the Hebrew text to Greek. It means something more like teaching, more like instruction. It's a whole world in a way, not simply the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, but the whole tradition, the Tanakh, but also how it's been read over time and so forth. So to me, looking as an outsider, it seems to me that one of the things that's at the heart of Jewish life is interpreting Torah. How shall we live? What does Torah instruct us to do? What is the way of Torah? And of course, anytime you try to grapple with what something means in daily life, there are going to be disputations. There are going to be differences of opinion. And so one of the things that I think most Christians have no idea is that when Jesus is arguing with the Pharisees, it's not because he's a Christian and they're Jews, but because arguing or disputing, contending about Torah, it is part of the Jewish way of life. It's like how you work out what it means. Now, as I'm part of the Roman Catholic tradition, and we say some pretty strong things over against one another. We are not of one heart, one mind, and one soul. When that's read from the Acts of the Apostles, I think, oh my God, it never was that way, and it never will be that way. So we Christians need to really turn their imagination about what we understand Torah to be. Now, so then the Pharisees are one of many Jewish groups who were focused on Torah, trying to understand, live out Torah. And so they were a voluntary association, of collegium, focused on on what had become a particular way of interpreting Torah that enfolded developments in tradition. And out of the Pharisaic tradition, you have something like oral law coming, but that, it doesn't happen just overnight. So there are other groups of Jews that we know more about now, of course, especially because of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947. As a student once said to me, undergraduate student, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found by a shepherd boy named Bedouin. Well, anyway, he was close. So first of all, any kind of group, any kind of voluntary association is going to be heterogeneous. So we don't know that, the Pharisees seem to have had no constitution that we know. There is no document that we can say with surety the Pharisees composed. So one of the things about the scholars' Pharisees is that there has to be a necessary humility that one of my friends, the late and wonderful Anthony J. Saldarini, wrote a book in 1988 on the Pharisees, scribes, and Sadducees in Palestinian society. And it's sort of a lengthy book. And toward the end of the book, on page 277, in fact, he writes, "Data on the Pharisees is so sparse and difficult to evaluate that any historical reconstruction must remain incomplete and uncomfortably hypothetical." I said to him, "Tony, if you would have said that to me on page 2, I wouldn't have struggled through all of these, so that we can't be exactly sure about what the Pharisees taught, but what scholars do is sort of work from the background of things that we are learning about Judaism in the period of the Second Temple, which goes from basically around 515 before the Common Era through the year 70, or sometimes stated to 135 of the Common Era. In other words, 600, 700 years in which Judaism is developing, and which there is an abundant literature, some of which constitutes the canon of the Jewish Bible, and then of the Christian Bible in somewhat different way, but also many other documents that were not part of the canon, but enrich our world of New Testament texts because they're closer in time to the writing of the New Testament. And at this time in the first century, as what will become Christianity is developing, there is no norming body to say this way of reading Torah is the right way and this way is the wrong way. And so the Pharisees were contending with other schools of thought, what the historian Josephus, who was born roughly a few years after the death of Jesus and lives to about 100, what he calls schools of philosophy. So here's another thing that very often when preachers talk about some Jewish background of text, they sort of speak about Judaism as it's, there were the prophets and that was the high point. And then after that, or to equate Judaism with the Old Testament without understanding that the Old Testament was already old to Jews. They needed constantly to be interpreting, rethinking, and so forth. And that of course continues today. And that the Pharisaic movement was diverse and it had fluid boundaries, including Christ following Pharisees. And I think this is a term that we just don't really take into consideration sufficiently. One of them is Nicodemus in the Gospel of John, but most prominently is the Apostle Paul, who is very proud of being a Jew, gives us in the letter to the Philippians, gives us in a sense his biography as a Jew. And there is a very rich school or development within the scholars, so that just as we have the scholars Pharisees, you could say we have the scholars Paul, who read the letters of Paul now as a Jew preaching to Gentiles, and that what appears to us to be a critique of Judaism is a way of saying to Gentiles, you have a distinct way of approaching God through Jesus, and to take on Torah is not your responsibility, it's not your call. At any rate, I digress just slightly, but it's very important. I think if preachers would keep in mind that St. Paul, in my own tradition, was a Jew, and a Pharisee, I think it just might recalibrate a bit their emphases. So the Pharisees are part of Second Temple Judaism. They're one of many schools of thought who are interpreting Jewish life. So this is an advertisement. I see that at least early on anyway, Amy Jo Levine is on this interfaith forum. I didn't know that AJ would be on, but since she is the co-editor of this marvelous volume called The Pharisees, I'd like to give a shout out. So this very fine new book on the Pharisees, which lodged on the shelves behind me, is what you could call something of the latest scholarship. But what I want to call to your attention, it's based on an interreligious conference, scholars conference in 2021 that was at the Vatican. Now, I'm a Catholic feminist, so the Vatican doesn't automatically just suggest beauty and wonder and all of that to me. But that people could come together from all over the world, scholars, Jewish, Christian, secular, to explore together the Pharisees. And it's given in a sense, it has the blessing of Pope Francis. So this is at the end of the book, where he says, may your work receive abundant blessings from the Most High, or as many of our Jewish brothers and sisters would say, from Hashem. Now, I will be the first to say that this is a really important book. It's not a book for everyone because it's fairly technical. Some of the essays are more accessible than others. But so if you know someone who preaches and is a serious and teaches and is a serious person, this is a great Christmas gift or Advent gift, or for that matter, for Hanukkah, because I think it's important for Jews to also see that this wealth of scholarship that is available. So let me then just take a few minutes, because I want to leave time for questions and comments. How is it that we can make these claims, say, about the Pharisees? Well, it seems to me that one of the things that we can look at here is both new knowledge and new approaches. We know so much more. Scholars today, because of the tremendous work that's gone on, have revealed how much vitality and diversity there was in the Second Temple period. So this is when the temple is rebuilt after the exile in Babylon. And as I said, there's so much happening in this time period, so that, when I was first studying about Judaism, this was not a period that was understood. And it seems to me, from how I often hear preachers talk, it's still something that is foreign, that so many Christians have no understanding of Jewish life beyond the Old Testament. But to say that those texts are kept being reinterpreted, reimagined, and so forth, so that Second Temple Judaism represents a continuing development from Israelite religion, which is what we see in the Old Testament, and then it will lead to, especially in the flowering of the 4th and 5th centuries, to Rabbinic Judaism, which develops out of this, but goes in somewhat particular directions. So again, there's not a central government, not an institutional Judaism. Judaism is still in a formative period, and so there's this, as I say, vitality and diversity. Now, new approaches, and I'll be quite brief here. So biblical scholarship is actually a very, very large world. It's an umbrella term. So there are approaches from sociology, from anthropology, understanding more about purity rules, where they come from, how they're part of antiquity. In the terms of Jewish life, there were ritual purity rules, but also moral purity. What it meant to be in an honor-shame culture, what it meant to be part of a patriarchal culture. Patriarchy was simply part of the world of antiquity. It doesn't seem to have disappeared from the modern world either, at least in my experience. So the gender studies contribute to this. And then historical studies, which situate the New Testament in the world of the Roman Empire, in the literary forms of Hellenistic literature, and then also in social history, showing that, yes, there were tensions as especially after the turn of the first century into the second and then the third, there were tensions between the following, the Jesus following Jews and other Jews, and then between Jewish communities and Gentile intellectuals that wrote some of the patristic texts and so forth. But also the Jews and Christians, as they came to be called, didn't live in different social worlds. And so while there was conflict, there was also cooperation. So, and then there's such an abundant secondary literature, and I would recommend that everyone, especially Christians, would buy and use the Jewish Annotated New Testament, especially the second edition, which has a fuller body of essays, background essays that are just wonderful. And you don't have to be a serious scholar to benefit from this. There are some really fine, just sort of the footnotes, and it's important, again, that we would have an edition of the New Testament annotated by Jewish scholars is, I think, a testimony to something really important in our world, really significant. So finally, let me talk a little bit about some implications for the church. So one of the things that I'm hypothesize when I sit in church and listen to sermons is why do preachers tend to stay away from giving any kind of important background? And now I understand that a sermon or a homily is not supposed to be didactic. It's supposed to be inspiring and touch into people's life of faith. But what I think we haven't done sufficiently in the church is to help people be both religious and critical. And so I want to say a word about the critical term in particular. Critical in the sense now of its Greek root of meaning discernment, of probing texts in the context in which they are embedded. So, it's like being, so in a way, this is being like a literary critic, and not critic in the negative sense of the term. I mean, nobody likes to be called, no one likes to be the subject of criticism. But if we think then of being a religiously discerning interpreter, maybe that word would have more power. So to be critical about the text of the Pharisees, that is to absorb their context and to see them in relationship to other ways of living Jewishly in their time and place, a caution about drawing definitive conclusions, and realizing that, in a sense, the New Testament depiction of the Pharisees is just that. It's a depiction for polemical purposes, which would require more time than we have today. And then to read the Pharisees not as emblematic or representative of Jews, but as a context of human frailty in which hypocrisy and self-righteousness and so on inflict all of us. I mean, in a way, Matthew 23 is one of the most brilliant texts of the New Testament in poking what happens when religiosity goes astray. And then religious now in the sense of seeking what the text has meant for faith communities who hold it as part of sacred literature, as well as what it means for contemporary communities of faith. So a willingness for me now, speaking personally as a Catholic who has long been interested in the relationship of my tradition with Jews and Judaism, is a willingness to learn painful truths about one's tradition, to know the long history of our relationship with Jews and Judaism, and then to be vulnerable rather than defensive in the face of what are really disquieting truths. Next semester, for the first time, I am teaching a course on anti-Semitism at the intersection of racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia. And what a time for us at Union to be studying anti-Semitism as it resurges in the present moment. And then the imperative of justice, of respecting the Jewish tradition as an obligation of Christians who are seeking truth, because in fact, we often have not had a true portrait of Jews given to us in Christian texts and Christian teaching and preaching. So I end my presentation there, and Rabbi Con Harris, I believe, is going to coordinate the Q&A or comments. If you do wish to comment rather than ask a question, could you be as economical as possible so that more than one person could be able to speak?
I'm going to go a little further than that and say, if you have a comment rather than a question, why don't you put it in the chat function for us so we can all have a little look at it. And if you've got a question, please put your hand up and I'll be happy to go around, and I'm sure the boys will answer.
So Rabbi Con Harris and Thea for the Oxford Interfaith Forum, thank you so much for your hospitality. And I thought I was speaking primarily to people in the UK, but I see that there's a few Americans here thrown in. So I'm always glad when we can have conversations back and forth across the pond. So.
Thank you so much, Professor Boyes. I'm sure everyone will join me in doing a little clapping either online, or you can put up your little emoji like I did. We really appreciate you giving up your time this way and sharing your immense thoughts and knowledge with this group, and really bringing up such important questions and opening up the conversation in the way that you did. I personally also find it so wonderful just listening to how you speak and the ways in which you own your own social location in this conversation, which I think is so important when we're doing an interfaith piece. And so I want to thank you for that as well. And thank you to everyone for being with us and being here today for the Oxford Interfaith Forum.